The cold bite of the Montana winter seeped through Catherine Ross's threadbare coat as she stood trembling on the porch, her knuckles white from clutching the wooden railing. Blood trickled from her split lip, metallic and warm against the bitter chill of 1876. Behind her, the door of the cabin slammed open, and her husband's shadow stretched across the weathered planks. "Get back inside, woman," Gerald Ross growled, his voice slurred from whiskey. 5 years of marriage had taught Catherine that the more he drank, the harder his fists became. "No," she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of countless bruises and broken promises. "I can't do this anymore." Gerald's face contorted with rage. "You're my wife," he spat, lunging forward and grabbing her arm with such force she knew it would bruise by morning. "You go where I say you go." Catherine struggled against his grip as he tried to drag her back through the doorway. The small town of Redemption Creek lay just down the hill, lights twinkling against the darkening sky. So close, yet it might as well have been 1,000 miles away. "Please," she begged, digging her heels into the porch. "Gerald, you're hurting me." "You haven't seen hurting yet," he threatened, raising his hand. The sound of a horse approaching made them both freeze. Through the fading light, Catherine could make out a tall figure on horseback coming up the path to their isolated cabin. Gerald's grip tightened painfully on her arm. "Evening," called a deep voice as the rider came into view. He was a stranger, broad-shouldered and steady in his saddle. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but Catherine could see the glint of observant eyes taking in the scene before him. "This is private property," Gerald snarled. "Keep moving." The stranger dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. "Seems to me the lady might need assistance," he said, his voice calm but carrying a subtle edge of steel. "My wife and I are having a private conversation." Gerald yanked Catherine closer, causing her to stumble. The stranger stepped forward, and Catherine could now see his face clearly weathered from the sun and wind, with kind eyes that contrasted with the hard set of his jaw. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a dusting of stubble across his face and dark hair visible beneath his hat. "Madam?" the stranger asked, looking directly at Catherine. "Are you all right?" Before she could answer, Gerald jerked her backward. "She's fine. Now get off my land before I put a bullet in you." The stranger's gaze never wavered from Catherine's face, where a bruise was already blooming alongside her split lip. "I believe the lady can speak for herself." Gerald's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "She's my wife, and I'll do what I want with her." The stranger's hand moved casually to rest near his holster. "You're not his to take," he said softly to Catherine, ignoring Gerald completely. "Not if you don't want to be." Time seemed to stand still as Catherine looked into the eyes of this unknown man who was offering her a choice no one had given her in years. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Gerald demanded. "Blake Kincaid," the stranger replied evenly. "I bought the old Miller Ranch last month, making my introductions to the neighbors." His gaze returned to Catherine, though I didn't expect to find such unpleasant circumstances. Gerald released Catherine's arm to step toward Blake, his hand reaching for the pistol tucked into his belt. "I don't care if you're the president himself. This is between me and my wife." Blake moved with surprising speed. Before Gerald could draw his weapon, Blake had his own pistol leveled at the other man's chest. "I wouldn't," he advised quietly. Catherine backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. 5 years of fear and pain churned inside her, alongside something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. "The lady has a choice to make," Blake said, his eyes never leaving Gerald. "And I'll ensure she gets to make it freely." Gerald's face twisted with hatred. "She's going nowhere." "I am," Catherine said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'm leaving, Gerald." Gerald lunged for her, but Blake stepped between them. "That's enough," he warned. "The lady has spoken." "You can't just take my wife," Gerald shouted. "I'm not taking anything," Blake replied. "She's choosing to leave. There's a difference a man like you wouldn't understand." Catherine edged toward Blake's horse, her entire body trembling. "I have nothing," she whispered. "Nowhere to go." "Redemption Creek has a decent boarding house," Blake said, without taking his eyes off Gerald. "Mrs. Peterson is a fair woman. She'll give you a room and some time to sort things out." Gerald's rage was building visibly, his breathing heavy and uneven. "If you leave with him, don't you ever think about coming back, Catherine. You'll be dead to me." Those words, meant to frighten her, instead felt like a release. "I've been dead here for years," she replied softly. Blake backed toward his horse, keeping his weapon trained on Gerald. "Can you ride, Mrs. Ross?" Catherine nodded, though she hadn't been on a horse in years. Gerald had sold her mare after their first anniversary, claiming they needed the money. In truth, he'd wanted to ensure she couldn't easily leave. "Take my hand," Blake instructed, extending his left arm while his right remained steady with the pistol. Catherine hesitated for only a moment before reaching out. His hand was warm and calloused, the grip firm as he helped her mount his horse. Gerald watched with murderous eyes. "This isn't over," he threatened. "A man has rights to his wife." Blake holstered his weapon and mounted behind Catherine in one smooth motion. "A woman has rights to her life," he countered, "and I'd wager most folks in town would agree once they see her face." With that, he turned the horse and started down the path. Catherine didn't look back, even as Gerald's curses followed them into the growing darkness. They rode in silence for several minutes, Catherine acutely aware of Blake's solid presence behind her. His arms reached around her to hold the reins, creating a circle that felt both protective and strangely comforting. "Thank you," she finally whispered, her words nearly carried away by the wind. "No need for thanks," Blake replied, his voice rumbling close to her ear. "No decent man could ride past what I saw." "You could have been killed," Catherine said. "Gerald is dangerous when he's been drinking." "Men like that are only dangerous when no one stands up to them," Blake said. "I've met his kind before." As they approached the town, Catherine became increasingly conscious of her appearance, her torn dress, the blood on her face, the bruises beginning to form. "I can't go to the boarding house like this," she said suddenly. "Everyone will know." Blake slowed the horse. "They'll know regardless, Mrs. Ross. A town this size doesn't keep many secrets." "Catherine," she corrected quietly. "Please call me Catherine." Blake nodded, the motion felt rather than seen in the growing darkness. "Catherine, then." They continued into Redemption Creek, the main street still busy with evening activity despite the cold. Lanterns glowed warmly from the windows of the saloon and general store, and a few townspeople walked along the boardwalks, heading home for the night. Catherine could feel curious eyes turning their way. A woman riding double with a man who wasn't her husband would cause talk enough, but her obvious injuries would set tongues wagging even faster. She fought the urge to hide her face. Blake guided his horse to the front of a two-story building with a neatly painted sign announcing Peterson's Boarding House. Before he could dismount, the door opened and a stout woman with silver-streaked hair appeared on the porch. "Mr. Kincaid," she called, "what brings you to town this evening?" Blake dismounted and reached up to help Catherine down. As her feet touched the ground, she swayed slightly, exhaustion and pain catching up to her. Blake steadied her with a gentle hand at her elbow. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, "this is Mrs. Catherine Ross. She's in need of lodging for a while." The older woman's eyes widened as she took in Catherine's battered face, then narrowed with understanding. "Gerald Ross's wife," she said, not a question, but a statement. Catherine nodded, fighting the shame that threatened to overwhelm her. "Well," Mrs. Peterson said briskly, "that's been a long time coming." She stepped aside, gesturing to the open door. "Come in, dear. We'll get you settled." Catherine looked uncertainly at Blake. "How can I repay you?" "By taking care of yourself," he replied simply. "Mrs. Peterson, can you put her lodging on my account for now?" "There's no need," Catherine began to protest. "I insist," Blake interrupted gently, "until you're on your feet." Mrs. Peterson nodded. "Of course, Mr. Kincaid. Now come along. Mrs. Ross, you look dead on your feet." Catherine took a step toward the boarding house, then turned back. "Will he come after me?" she asked Blake, voicing her deepest fear. Blake's expression hardened slightly. "If he's smart, he won't. I'll have a word with Sheriff Davis in the morning, just to be sure he understands the situation." Catherine nodded, grateful beyond words. "Good night, Mr. Kincaid." "Blake," he corrected with a small smile. "Just Blake." "Good night, Blake," she whispered, before allowing Mrs. Peterson to lead her inside. The next morning, Catherine awoke in an unfamiliar bed, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous night came rushing back. Her body ached, particularly her face and arm, where Gerald had grabbed her. But beneath the pain was something else, a lightness. A sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. Mrs. Peterson had been kindness itself, providing Catherine with a hot bath, clean night clothes, and a small but comfortable room at the back of the boarding house. She'd asked no prying questions, simply stated that breakfast would be served at 7 and that Catherine was welcome to stay as long as needed. After dressing in the same clothes from yesterday, the only ones she possessed, Catherine made her way downstairs. The boarding house dining room was empty save for Mrs. Peterson, who was setting out plates of eggs and bacon. "Good morning, dear," the older woman greeted her. "Sit, eat, you're too thin by half." Catherine did as instructed, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. "Thank you for your kindness," she said between bites. Mrs. Peterson waved away her thanks. "Women must look out for one another in this world. Now, about your situation." A knock at the door interrupted her. Mrs. Peterson excused herself and returned moments later with Blake Kincaid. Catherine's heart did an unexpected little jump at the sight of him. In daylight, she could see him clearly for the first time, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore simple rancher's clothes, practical and well-worn. "Good morning," he said, removing his hat as he entered. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Mrs. Peterson assured him. "Sit, have some breakfast. I was just about to discuss matters with Mrs. Ross." Blake took a seat across from Catherine, his eyes briefly taking in her bruised face before politely looking away. "I've spoken with Sheriff Davis," he said. "He'll be keeping an eye on Gerald Ross, made it clear there would be consequences if he caused any trouble." Catherine nodded gratefully. "Thank you." The sheriff also mentioned that if you wish to file for divorce, Judge Wilson would likely be sympathetic to your case, Blake added. Divorce. The word hung in the air, both terrifying and liberating. In Catherine's world, marriage was forever, no matter how painful or destructive. But the possibility of freedom, of a life without fear. "I have no money," she said finally. "No means